Shalom and welcome to the Hebrew of Israel channel. This episode will cover the three sons of Noah from a genetic perspective. According to the scriptures, Noah had three sons named Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and only 8 lives were saved on the ark, and it's up to them to repopulate the world.
These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, and Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread.
There is a strong parallel between Adam and Eve and Shem, Ham, and Japheth, as Adam and Eve were the father and mother of the pre-flood world and had dominion over it. Shem, Ham, and Japheth became the new fathers, and their wives the new mothers of this post-flood world, and are given dominion over it.
And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. Right. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou, and thy wife, and thy sons wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. Chapter 9. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man. At the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. And you, be ye fruitful, and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein.
I believe all of mankind today can trace their lineage back to Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Remember, the flood was global and killed off all humans except for the 8 on the ark. This is why the Most High told Shem, Ham, and Japheth to repopulate the earth, which is the same words the Most High told Adam and Eve. Again, Noah and his sons are like a new Adam and Eve.
And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And you, Be ye fruitful, and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread.
According to Genesis chapter 10, Shem, Ham, and Japheth had many children.
Chapter 10. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tyrus. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Riphath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Raamah, and Sabteka. And the sons of Raamah, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah, the same as a great city. And Mizraim begat Ludim, and Anamim, and Lehabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrusim, and Cashluhim, out of whom came Philistim, and Caphtorim. And Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgasite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. And afterward were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as thou comest to Gerar unto Gaza, as thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah, and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. The children of Shem, Elam, and Asher, and Arphaxad, and Lud, and Aram. And the children of Aram, Uz, and Hul, and Gether, and Mash. And Arphaxad begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber. And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. And Joktan begat Almodad, and Sheleph, and Hazar-Maveth, and Jerah, and Hadoram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Abimael, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. And their dwelling was from Mesha, as thou goest unto Sephar, a mount of the east. These are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood.
I believe all of current humanity can trace their lineage back to the people mentioned in Genesis chapter 10. And I believe DNA can prove this. The scriptures gives us a few scientific tools we can use to determine this. First of all, Genesis chapter 10 mentions men for the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now obviously, Shem, Ham, and Japheth had daughters. This is even mentioned in the scriptures. But the focus seems to be on the male lineage. Scientifically, we call this a paternal lineage. We can use Y-DNA haplogroups to figure out the lineage of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But before we go too deep, what is a Y-DNA chromosome? Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
As many Americans know, the third President of the United States and author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, was an important figure in the emergence of early American identity and is considered one of the major founding fathers of the country. And although many today argue over his own personal moral character and ethics, it was a major point of contention even hundreds of years ago, and many spread rumors of Jefferson's ongoing affair with his slave Sally Hemings, and whether he was the father of her 6 children, an act which would have been highly frowned upon even in the 18th century. Centuries later, in 1998, it has seemingly been proven through DNA tests that Jefferson was indeed the biological father of Hemings' children, despite the fact that there were no viable biological samples of the deceased president in existence. So how did they do it? When it comes to human genetics, perhaps the best way to determine hypodescent or common ancestry in individuals and population clusters is through a specific genetic marker known as a haplogroup. Haplogroups are a common way for geneticists, archaeologists, and historians to make conclusions over the origins, exchange, and evolution of people groups all over the world, and you may have heard me mention them in videos from time to time for the past year, but unless you knew beforehand, information on haplogroups may just cause confusion and misinformation for many viewers. Therefore, I've created this video to better give an understanding of how haplogroups relate to genetics, race, ethnicity, community, and other aspects of humanity that paint such a beautiful picture of the history and diversity of our planet. For as long as can be traced back, all females carry a maternal haplogroup inherited from their mother, while males carry both a maternal and paternal haplogroup, seeing how men have an X and Y chromosome. The paternal haplogroup inherited by the father is known as the Y haplogroup from the Y chromosome, while the maternal haplogroup is inherited from mitochondrial DNA and is thus referred to as the mtDNA. Because of historical patterns of migration and the nature of male-female relationships for most of human history, generally speaking, paternal haplogroups are better studied, understood, and mapped out, although this doesn't make maternal lineage irrelevant or any less interesting. For this reason, haplogroups will only survive to the next generation if they're passed on to their offspring of the same sex through the X or Y chromosomes. Now, you may not necessarily ever have an offspring that is the same gender as yourself, in which case your specific haplogroup would die with either you or your child, but at least one of your parents sure did, as with one of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and so on, back to the genesis of the human species. Barring genetic mutations, if you're a male, it's an absolute certainty that you will share the same paternal haplogroup with your father, all of your biological brothers born of the same father, all of your paternal uncles, any paternal male cousins born to your uncle, and of course your paternal grandfather, his father, and so on, and all biological male children of yours will share your paternal haplogroup. Similarly, barring genetic mutation, regardless of gender, you will share the same maternal haplogroup with your mother, all of your biological siblings born to the same mother, all of your maternal aunts and uncles, any maternal cousins born to your aunt, as well as your maternal grandmother, her mother, and so on. And if you're a female, then all biological children of yours will share your maternal haplogroup, although only your female children will pass it on to their offspring. Now, you may be wondering, how did the first haplogroups form? What is the criteria for categorizing various haplogroups? How and why did the haplogroups we see today become scattered across the planet? All good questions, and as usual, the simplest explanation is often the correct one, as indeed all living humans today share ancestry with a common ancestor in both the male and female line, dubbed the genetic Adam and Eve of the human species, and the descendants of these two evolved into the 7.6 billion people of Earth we see today, and the genetic adaptations and natural selection form the modern races of humanity. New haplogroups are created when slight mutations occur when passing DNA to the next generation, and these mutations can generally be traced back to the original source, and hence the standard naming convention for haplogroups is a letter of the English alphabet, followed by the ordering of whichever specific group or subclade its mutation belongs to. In conclusion, haplogroups, along with language, ethnicity, and religion, are one of the best ways of accurately defining population groupings of the human species, and I hope this better explained haplogroups, DNA, and human genetics, and showed you just how interconnected the world's population is, even if every group has its own unique traits, history, and culture. Please let me know.
What's up, everyone? I'm Helena Alamu, and welcome to another episode of the DNA Download, where we explain the science of genetics so you can live in the know. When people talk about their DNA results, I keep hearing the word haplogroups. Joining me today is Dr. Samantha Esselman, a scientist from the 23andMe Ancestry team who can unpack this concept. So, Samantha, what are haplogroups? Truly, it sounds like a word my dad would make up in Scrabble.
Well, it's definitely a real word. A haplogroup is a grouping or an assignment of similar sets of patterns in people's DNA. So it's kind of like if we were to group people based on something like their zip codes.
Oh.
And then we can use these patterns of DNA to trace the ancient origins of your ancestry.
Okay, so then how do you make these groupings from DNA?
So people have two special pieces of DNA which we use to define two different kinds of haplogroups. The first kind is paternal haplogroups, traced through Y chromosomes, which get passed exclusively from fathers to sons. And the second kind is maternal haplogroups, traced through mitochondrial DNA, which gets passed from mothers to both sons and daughters.
Okay, then what makes these two pieces of DNA special?
So that's a great question. It's because the inheritance pattern is really simple, especially compared to the rest of your genome. And actually the beginning of the word haplogroup, haplo, comes from the Greek word aplos, which means simple.
Oh, well, that's a good memory jogger.
Yeah. And so most of our DNA comes from a sort of random shuffling of our parents' DNA, which can make it difficult to figure out which side of the family each piece comes from.
Oh.
But then Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA don't get shuffled.
But then if they aren't shuffled, why aren't everyone's haplogroups exactly the same?
That's a great question. So over the more than 200,000 or so years of human evolution, the occasional DNA changes occurred and got passed on, creating new haplogroups.
Okay.
I have an analogy.
Okay.
So imagine a guy thousands of years ago, and this guy has a special recipe for his, award-winning paleo soup.
Oh, okay.
And then he, along with his brothers, inherited this recipe from his dad, who got it from his dad, and all the men in the family faithfully stick to this recipe, no changes.
Oh, well, I could go for some paleo soup right about now, but please, go on.
Yeah, this analogy always makes me hungry.
Okay, good.
And so then many generations later, a great-great-great-grandson adds some cilantro.
Oh.
And then this great-great-grandson passes on a slightly modified version of this recipe to his sons. And all the men on his branch of the family tree start following this new cilantro recipe.
Oh.
And so now if you think about it, there are essentially two soup haplogroups. And this is pretty much how haplogroup inheritance works.
That makes a lot of sense. And since I'm a woman and I don't have a Y chromosome, how can I trace my paternal haplogroup?
Yeah, so what you can do is you can learn from relatives who share your paternal line. And so this would be something like a dad or a brother.
Okay, cool. So then what about the mother's side, the maternal haplogroups?
Right, you can trace this other kind of haplogroup through the DNA found in our cells' mitochondria, which turn the food we eat into usable energy for our cells.
Ah, the powerhouse of the cell.
You know your biology memes. Yeah, so this mitochondrial DNA gets passed from moms to both sons and daughters.
Well, thanks, Mom. So how can we use haplogroups to trace our ancestry?
So closely related haplogroups tend to share geographic roots, and so scientists can use the kind of modern distributions of haplogroups around the world to trace some of these major migrations. And then these can help you understand where you fit into this ancient family tree of all humans.
Wow, I feel like the world just got a whole lot smaller. Thanks for being here, Samantha, and see you next time on the DNA Download.
When you get your DNA tested for genealogy, you will often see the term haplogroup come up. What is that? Join me on today's Ancestral Findings podcast, and I'll talk on what is a haplogroup and how does it pertain to your family tree. If you get your DNA tested, chances are you will come across the term haplogroup. What is a haplogroup, and how does it pertain to your family history? At its essence, a haplogroup is an ancestral clan. Some clans are the Vikings, Native Americans, all tribes, Celts, Aboriginal Australians, and other such groups. Your haplogroup tells you where your ancestors came from deep back in time. There are also male and female haplogroups, so you can see where your male and female sides of the family originated back in prehistoric times. As with Y-DNA, which traces the male line from father to son, and mtDNA, which traces the female line from mother to daughter, haplogroups also follow straight male and female descendancy lines. Your haplogroup's point of origin is usually shown on maps at the various DNA companies that do testing. The haplogroups that exist today originated with people whose descendants were very successful at reproducing in large families. Haplogroups today are divided into four main ones: European, African, Native American, and Asian. Within these haplogroups are many subhaplogroups that further define where a person's earliest known non-African ancestor on the male and female sides of their family originated, and when. Most haplogroup subgroups are plentiful. The only group with less than 3 subgroups is the Native American male group, which only has 2 subgroups. Basically, haplogroups chart the clans from which the modern human race originated. Haplogroups are named alphabetically in order of discovery. The subgroups of haplogroups are named with letter and number combinations, indicating where and when in time they were discovered, which main haplogroup they descended from, and sometimes even the very specific small geographical area where their earliest members lived. The more letters and numbers in your haplogroup's subgroup, the more likely you are to be able to pinpoint an exact region, and maybe even a county or town. Some haplogroup subgroups can even be traced back to named individuals if the mutation that created them originated in the more recent past. For example, the infamous Celt, Niall, of the 9 hostages, is known to be the originator of a subgroup of a haplogroup within the past 1,500 years. And some people can use their subgroup to prove their descent from him. Right now, haplogroups are the only way to trace your family tree back to the time before surnames were invented. You can take your last known ancestor in a particular direct male or direct female line and connect them to a larger clan in the more distant past, knowing that their ancestors, the ones you can't identify and trace, wound back through time to the time and place where the known ancestor's haplogroup and subgroup originated. For example, there is a known haplogroup of people who originated in France about 12,000 years ago, and who are widely believed to be the people who made the famous cave paintings in the French town of Chauvet. You can look at a maternal or paternal haplogroup and subgroup and see if it matches with the haplogroup and subgroup of the cave painters. If it does, you know you are descended from this illustrious and famous group of people. If you're interested at all in where your family originated deep in time, before the age of records, then haplogroups should be of great fascination for you. You can use them to get deep into history with your family tree. This is something that was not possible before the age of DNA testing.
Lineage important in the modern day? Some say no, but biology says yes. In almost every single culture around the world, much emphasis was placed on lineage, which is referring to an individual's line of ancestors, and still is important to a certain extent today. Some people around the world are quite proud of their lineage, and others not so much, while others say it shouldn't matter at all. Various cultures have different naming customs passed down from generation to generation in order to preserve their lineage, and this may vary by country. For instance, in the Anglo world, traditionally the father would pass on his surname to his children, but in the Spanish-speaking world, both the mother and father pass on their surnames to their children. Some cultures may traditionally only have one given name, while others may have several, but the surname, or family name, is what is generally passed on to cement the lineage of a certain family. The Kennedy, Clinton, Bush, Roosevelt, and Adams families are all examples of political families in the U.S. that have arguably been successful due to the power of their lineages. There is certainly power in a name. Nature thinks so too. That's why each and every human on the planet has a genetic surname. They're called haplogroups. Haplogroups are genetic markers that are extremely important in the study of history and anthropology because they can show an individual's or collective's simplified genetic past that gives clues to how different populations interacted. I've explained this in a past video, but essentially a woman will pass down her mitochondrial or maternal haplogroup onto all of her children, while a man will only pass down his Y DNA or paternal haplogroup only to his sons, because only males have a Y chromosome. Your maternal haplogroup is passed down from your biological mother to you, and it was passed down to her by her mother, your maternal grandmother, and your grandma's mom, and so on and so on. Since only males have a Y chromosome, if you were male, your father passed his paternal haplogroup to you, passed down by his father and his father before him. Are you starting to see how this mirrors many of the naming customs from around the world? Geneticists who are far more knowledgeable than myself on the subject have been able to map out haplogroup lineages around the world going back tens of thousands of years, which gives massive insight into past human migrations, periods of intermixing, and conquest. For tens of thousands of years, these haplogroups have been spreading across the globe, splintering and diversifying due to genetic mutation between generations, and this paints a very interesting picture. This is a pretty awesome map showing paternal haplogroup distribution around the world, but I think
So as we can see, Y-DNA haplogroups are a perfect tool we can use to determine the male lineage. We can use this to find the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, because haplogroups are passed down from father to son. This is exactly what we need to know. According to livingdna.com, what are haplogroups? It says, the paternal haplogroup relates to your Y chromosome, and since that is the sex-determining chromosome for men, it is passed down from father to son. Now the next method to use in determining the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth is language. After all, it was language that was used to separate and divide the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nation. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. These are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Chapter 11. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth.
Language families are important aspects when trying to determine the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, specifically proto-language families, since language was used to separate these people. We can combine our understanding with Y-DNA haplogroups and language. After all, people create languages and people carry haplogroups. Therefore, an ethnic group who first spoke their native language are likely all genetically related. With that being said, let's begin. I believe haplogroups formed after the flood because humans prior to the flood were genetically pure and had no mutations. But after the flood, the pre-flood world environment changed, and therefore humans changed as well, causing genetic mutations to occur. However, some people could make the argument that genetic mutations started to occur close to the time period of which the flood was going to occur, and Shem, Ham, and Japheth themselves could have had a genetic mutation as well.
And what happened is when God created Adam and he sinned, he fell, that errors came into the code. The master programmer endowed us with perfect code, and only at the fall of man did it become corrupted.
Number one, they would have a pure gene pool, no defective chromosomes. Today, the average person has about 4,000 defective genes. A gene, in case you don't know, is if you took a ladder, an extension ladder from here to Chicago, what, 900 miles, and you had somebody stand on the other end while you started twisting it here. You twisted and twisted and twisted and twisted. By the time it gets all twisted up from here to Chicago, that would be roughly what a chromosome looks like. Each cell in your body has 46 of those little chromosomes. The rung of the ladder would be a gene. So the illustration people use is a twisted ladder. Pretty tough to draw 2D, what a 3D ladder would look like twisted. But each of these things across here is a rung of the ladder. Each of those is called a gene. The whole thing is called a chromosome, or a DNA strand, deoxyribonucleic acid. The same thing as a chromosome, deoxyribonucleic acid. And this thing right across here is one gene, G-E-N-E. Now, when you get regenerated in Christ, you're being regened, totally new person, new genes. That's where the word regenerate comes from that word gene. Now that'll preach too. But during conception for the baby, half of this chromosome comes from the mother and half comes from the father. The problem is it splits down the middle. Now let's take a ladder that is twisted from here to Chicago. We're going to split it all the way down the middle. It's going to unwind itself, and it's going to get the other half of the ladder from the mother or father, depending what your case may be, and it's going to wind itself back together, and all those genes are going to line up. Absolutely phenomenal how this can happen. And that's one chromosome. You got 46 that are doing this. 46 chromosomes in every cell of your body. So radiation from the sun is one of the things that causes damage to these genes. You often see people at the hospital when they're going to get an x-ray, they will put a lead apron over where the ovaries are on a woman, for instance, because they know the x-ray could damage the chromosomes, could damage the genes for the next generation. Many things can damage this, and so they're trying to be very sensitive to not create damage to this. But one of the reasons they lived to be 900 before the flood was they had a pure gene pool, no genetic load. You've got about 4,000 of these genes in your gene code that are defective, sort of like a computer program where something's wrong. Now, if you marry closer than a first cousin, there's a high probability that you both have a similar gene code, and so you might both have the same defective genes. Now you're asking for trouble as far as deformed children. It's against the law in all but 3 states to marry closer than a first cousin. You have to marry second cousin or more farther away in all but 3 states in America. I won't tell you which the 3 states are, but drive through them and you'll be able to tell. The people anyway, the people were living long before the flood. They had no defective chromosomes in the original creation, number one. Number two, they had a canopy of water to protect them, to filter out the radiation from the sun. Number three, they're eating a perfect diet. They're also eating food that has been unaffected by any of this harmful stuff. Plus, they're eating food grown in soil that is not depleted at all, mineral-rich soil. I think in the original creation, they had perfect food supply, perfect atmosphere to breathe, no genetic load. They had probably several reasons why they were living to be 900 years old.
So the chemical code built on A, G, T, and C becomes corrupted as a result of the shuffling of the order of those bits, or a loss of one or more bits. And Adam, as the father of the race and a direct creation of God, had a perfect code. There was no loss of data or corruption of the data in any way. And it was when he fell that those things in some way got scrambled, or they lost some data, or something happened there where there was a loss of information. And John Sanford puts it this way. He says the extinction of the human genome appears to be just as certain and deterministic as the extinction of stars, the death of organisms, and the heat death of the universe. So he's discovered, and others have as well, that the entire human race is about 50% dead. We're on our way to extinction as a race, and because there are more and more mutations that continue to get into our genome. You really are more of a mutant than your parents, in case you're wondering your children are more mutant than you are. So it's not just some feeling that you had, but it's true. They really are more mutant. But we're all mutant. We're all mutating, and we're losing information. Well, during normal conception, not looking at the miraculous conception at this point, during reproduction, the maternal and paternal gametes, that is the haploid cells, fuse at conception to produce a zygote, which will turn into a fetus and eventually into an adult human being. And when two gametes unite during fertilization, each contributes its haploid set of chromosomes to the new individual, restoring the diploid number. So we can essentially look at it this way, is that Mary provided one half, and the Holy Spirit provided the other half, thus making the diploid number, which of course became the 46 unique chromosomes, or the 23 base pairs needed for the body of Jesus Christ. And that's the amazing thing, is that you have the terrestrial Mary with the celestial Holy Spirit combining to make the body of Jesus Christ. It's truly amazing. And now that we're in the genetic age, we can just catch a glimpse of what that miracle entailed. Now there's something else that happened that is quite astounding. We know that sin came through Adam, and as a result of sin, death spread to everything because of his sin. And we refer to this as the original sin. Well, it turns out that a son will inherit an identical copy of his father's Y chromosome, and this copy is also essentially identical to the Y chromosomes carried by all his paternal forefathers across the generations. We also read a male shares the same Y chromosome with his father, paternal grandfather, paternal great-grandfather, and so on. So, according to Neil Bradman and Mark Thomas, who are, incidentally, committed evolutionists, they don't believe in God or anything of this stuff, but they actually rewrote Genesis chapter 5 in modern terms. They say, Genesis chapter 5 records the generations of Adam. Adam begot Seth, Seth begot Enosh, etc., down to Noah with flood. Translated into modern genetic terms, the account could read, Adam passed a copy of his Y chromosome to Seth, Seth passed a copy of his Y chromosome to Enosh, Enosh passed a copy of his Y chromosome to Kenan, and so on until Noah was born carrying a copy of Adam's Y chromosome. Now this becomes very fascinating when we consider that, still according to these guys, they say that the Y chromosome may in fact be a record of an event in the life of our original father. Bradman and Thomas suggest that the Y chromosome contains a record of an event in the life of the man who passed on the current Y chromosome, which they say had no effect on the life of the man in whom the change occurred, nor indeed on the life of his descendants. However, is it possible that the recorded event is not something that had little or no effect, but is in some way the record of the genetic fall of our first father? And obviously I argue that that is indeed the case.
The early descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth likely are the first ones to form haplogroups, but like I said, you could also make the argument that Shem, Ham, and Japheth themselves would have been the first to have haplogroups. It depends on your model. Nevertheless, I somewhat reject the phylogenetic tree, but I do understand the concept and its importance. Basically, I agree with it to a certain extent, such as I agree that all humans today have a common ancestor, and that haplogroups can be used to trace back to that common ancestor. But I believe post-flood humanity traced their lineage back to Noah, their most common recent ancestor. I believe haplogroups form 3 ancestral nodes that can be used to trace back to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. PhD Dr. Nathaniel Jansen, who studied at Harvard University, has data illustrating 3 ancestral nodes that represent the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. According to the article at Institute for Creation Research titled DNA Trends Confirm Noah's Family, it reads, when research biologist Dr. Nathaniel Jansen plotted hundreds of human mitochondrial DNA sequences onto a tree diagram, the project revealed an obvious pattern. The mtDNA stemmed from 3 central trunks or nodes instead of just 1. 3 trends in Jansen's data suggest that the wives of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, best explains this finding. Jansen first downloaded mtDNA sequences taken from all major human groups. He then used standard software that arranges the most similar sequences closest together. The result is a tree-like diagram depicting lines of ancestry. Jansen's data show that the human mtDNA tree has 3 nodes. Thus, everyone alive today carries one of the three unique ancestral maternal sequences. This fits Genesis' claim that all humans who exist today descend from one of the wives of Noah's sons. We find the second trend in the number of DNA differences between the three central nodes. At today's mtDNA mutation rate, 2 to 8 nucleotide differences would have accumulated in the 9th generation between Adam and Noah, and the difference between the three central nodes also shows 8 DNA differences. And according to Answers Research Journal, titled On the Origin of Human Maternal DNA Differences, New Generation Time, data both suggests a unique young Earth creation model and challenge the evolutionary out of Africa model. It reads, in theory, among these three wives, Africans and Asians may have traced their ancestry back to different women. Consistent with this hypothesis, the highly divergent San and Taiwanese Aborigine individuals traced their ancestry back to different mtDNA nodes. Thus, not only did the San and Taiwanese Aborigine not share a common ancestor after the Tower of Babel incident, they also appeared to have different maternal ancestors at the time of the flood. Human mtDNA tree for 369 individuals of varying ethnicities. The 369 human mtDNA sequences clustered into three major nodes, which were indicated by green block arrow. One of the nodes spawned almost exclusively sub-Saharan African individuals, whereas the other two nodes gave rise predominantly to non-African and North African individuals. The position of the 6 South African individuals analyzed in Table 4 were indicated with blue block arrows and underlines. The position of the individuals from the primarily African node with shorter branch lengths were indicated by gold arrows. The most divergent pair of individuals was between the San and Taiwanese Aborigine individuals, noted by the red block arrows and underlines. Just like Dr. Nathaniel Jansen mapped out 3 ancestral nodes for the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, I believe the same thing exists for the male lineage of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And I also believe in an out of Asia theory for this new branch of humanity because Noah's Ark rested in Asia, in the Middle East. And there's a 2020 paper titled The Reversal of Human Phylogeny. Homo left Africa as Erectus, came back as Sapiens sapien, which states that the most common ancestral lineage, Y-DNA Adam, is suggested to have originated somewhere in the Middle East or the Iranian Plateau. This would mean Africans and Eurasians both came from West Asia and separated from West Asia to Africa and other parts of the world, fitting with the idea of Shem, Ham, and Japheth descendants all being generally around the same area with each other before dispersing. My model for the breakdown of Shem, Ham, and Japheth is this. Ham would be represented by haplogroup A and B. Japheth would be represented by haplogroup CF, and Shem would be represented by haplogroup DE. These 3 Y-DNA haplogroups would represent the ancestral nodes for all men today, post-flood, going back to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This YAP positive marker that only people who descend from haplogroup DE have, to me gives more credence to 3 ancestral nodes for Shem, Ham, and Japheth, since haplogroups A and B and CF are YAP negative. It makes sense to divide the 3 haplogroup branches as such. Haplogroup DE is perfectly in the middle of haplogroup A and B and CF lineages. With that being said, the model I assign is this. The African haplogroup A and B is Ham, The Eurasian haplogroup CF is Japheth, and the Asian and African haplogroup DE is Shem. I end with this. We all descend from Noah, a righteous man, a great prophet, and a man chosen by the Most High.
But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
And with that being said, be blessed and shalom.